So Ian, we now take the outline design of the NHS Operations Directorate.
Thank you, Chairman. The purpose of this paper is to update the board on how thinking has developed in relation to the Operations Directorate since the board meeting in February 2012 considered an initial set of interim design proposals. Before getting into that, though, perhaps be worth just taking a step back and just reflecting upon the purpose of the Operations Directorate within the board. And I think it builds very much on what David said earlier about how the board is structured and why it is structured in that way. The key purpose of the Operations Directorate is to be the board's interface with the NHS, with local government and with other key stakeholders outside the national support structure. So our aim is very much to resource that contact close to patients, and our structures necessarily follow this. So our structure needs to be able to achieve a national span, because this is a single national organisation. It's not a set of separate tiers as we have had in the past, so it's a new system. But we are serious about having real local reach. We need to partner local CCGs and health and wellbeing boards to improve services to patients at the local level. So our structures need to reflect that national span and local reach as well. Importantly, the structure also needs to be able to make interface with the NHS Commissioning Board really simple for people who we have to work with. So the whole point of having multidisciplinary teams at the area team level is so that they can reflect the whole range of the board's business in local discussions with CCGs, local government partners, NHS providers, and patient interests, so that they're not having to have separate and different conversations about performance from finance, from clinical strategy and clinical outcomes and clinical quality, and those things are brought together in a single conversation through a multidisciplinary matrix way of working, and the structure needs to reflect that as well. So I think those are the expectations we have of the Operations Directorate. They are significant. Inevitably, the scale of the country we work across means that the Operations Directorate is necessarily the largest in the commissioning board. It has significant responsibilities for around £23 billion of direct commissioning, of services from primary care professionals, of specialised services, and a range of other really important functions. Equally, we have an important responsibility to work very closely with our CCG colleagues. We're aiming for a relationship of partnership with CCGs. We sit alongside them on health and wellbeing boards, and we need to be there helping CCGs be as good as they can be. At the same time, that sits necessarily alongside an accountability relationship to ensure that outcomes in return for public money are improved. And importantly, we also have a range of functions in relation to things such as family health services functions to actually make the system work, which will employ a lot of staff. So a large number of staff spread across the country. The February board meeting considered, therefore, a structure to make that happen. At that time, we talked about a small team at the National Support Centre, 4 regions and 50 what were called at that stage local offices, reflecting the current boundaries of the PCT clusters, at least initially. Inevitably, since then, a lot of things have happened. This is a dynamic and fast-changing environment in which we're working at the moment. And so conversations with people currently working in SHAs and PCTs, CCG leaders, representatives in local government, other members of the board and the people working on their functions as we develop the vision for the commissioning board have necessarily moved along. And therefore we've wanted to revisit that to make sure that that outline structure remains right before we lock it down. A couple of points I think that are worth mentioning. before I take us to the sort of conclusions of that. The point Barbara raised, I think, is quite significant. The number of clinical commissioning groups has reduced as clinical leaders have thought through their boundaries and decided that, you know, potentially covering larger populations makes sense. That necessarily has an impact on the interface between the local area teams and the clinical commissioning groups. For instance, you know, some current PCT clusters relate to one clinical commissioning group now, and I think we do need to ensure that in our structure there's neither too distant a relationship so that we're off somewhere not able to be part of local conversations, which would obviously nullify our influence, but at the same time not get so close into the CCGs that we are in danger of cutting across the leadership functions that they necessarily need to have in a devolved system, and which we're here to make sure work well. So in some senses, that giving CCG space is important, and a diminishing number of CCGs has to be a factor that we take into account. The other aspect that I'd want to highlight for the board is that we've necessarily thought about the way we bring staff together across the functions. And you'll recall in February in the design document we talked about the regions and the area offices, given their then previous nomenclature, having similar structures which would have a director together with leads for a medical lead, a nursing lead and a finance lead. And I think as we thought things through, I think we've recognised that creating a larger team would be useful. There's benefit, I think, in reflecting upon things like the direct commissioning roles that a number of these entities will contain, many of which reflect billions of pounds of expenditure, and identifying senior people at the top level of those teams to be able to discharge those functions. So I think the structure necessarily therefore needed to be thought about. What is the consequence of all that? Well, before I get to that, probably worth saying that we've had the 4 regional directors, as Joe said, in post, albeit mostly on a part-time basis, for the past few weeks. They've been engaged, I think, in thinking these things through, being out there, talking to their stakeholders, and forming a view on what the right configuration structurally and in terms of offices would be to deal with all the issues that I've talked about. And I think that takes us to where we've got to the structure that I'm commending to the board today, really. First, I think we want to stick with the principle of having 4 broadly similar regional teams. I think that makes sense. I think inevitably, as was recognised very clearly in the document in February, there are some particular issues in London that need to be brought into the structure of the London team. In particular, the need for a pan-London focus on a number of the functions that elsewhere in the country might be handled at the area level. But with the exception of that, I think we're clear that 4 regions is the right number. We've got 4 senior people in post, and we want to start building those teams. The local area teams, though, are reflecting on the decreased number of CCGs, and I don't think this will be a surprise to the NHS because it's a message we've been getting consistently from the NHS over recent weeks and months. We need to reduce from 50 the number of area teams. I would expect that when we formally confirm in a couple of weeks' time to the service the geographies of the area teams and their numbers, that we expect to end up at around 27 area teams, 24 outside London, and 3 in the capital. And of those, as was always going to be the case, a minority will be undertaking specialised commissioning based on an interface with the specialist providers who fall within their geographies. And I'm currently expecting that we'd be talking about 10 entities undertaking specialised commissioning on behalf of the board up and down the country. So I think those are the key headlines. If we land on 27 entities, I think a couple of points are worth saying. First, that while inevitably there will be variance because, for the reasons that Barbara talked about, you know, large rural CCGs cover large geographies, and that has an impact upon the interface with the commissioning board as opposed to metropolitan authorities. So it will vary, but it would give an average of around 8 CCGs per local area team, and a slightly smaller number of health and wellbeing boards. And I think that if that's where it lands, while reflecting that there'll be a range, that feels to me to be an appropriate number of organisations to get that relationship right. One of partnership and support, one of accountability, but not one of crowding or trying to second guess. And so that feels like it's landed in a sensible place. I think the other point I would make is that while we are likely to have significantly fewer than 50 area teams, one of the reasons that I was keen to change the nomenclature from local office to local area team, it's not just a question of semantics, it's also a reflection of the fact that they will cover significant geographies and will have almost invariably more than one office from which their staff are based. We have staff, particularly those involved in the really important functions of family health services supporting contractors who provide primary care, who are currently in many parts of the country dispersed geographically. And we're looking for a straightforward transition of those staff into the commissioning board on a lift and shift basis, which means that we would want us to be able to maintain people's current operational basis and be able to cover the geography. So the consequence of avoiding the confusion between a description of an office and a team is important, because I would expect that many of these, particularly ones with larger geographies, will need more teams, will need more offices, to be able to cover their geographies. So, in conclusion, I think my aim is that we have a structure that meets the important functions that we've got, reflecting that we're trying to create a new organisation which does not have distinct independent tiers, but which works as a national system, as part of a national system, albeit one really importantly with local reach and working effectively with local partners. I think we're revisiting the assumptions based on the experience that we've had since February. My aim, therefore, is to recommend that revision in design principles to the board, and to ask the board to note that I expect to be able to write out to the service and put on our website the exact details of local office geographies and names and functions, because they will vary in the next couple of weeks. So I'd like to park it there, Chairman, and be happy to answer any questions that the board may wish to pose.
Thank you very much. Another set of good progress. I open that to questions. Jo.
I just want to say something in support of what Ian said and to build on it a little bit. So it's not necessarily a question, but I'm just conscious of staff in the existing system, particularly in SHAs and PCTs, who might be looking at these jobs. And what I just want to pull out from that perspective is one of the key drivers behind this was, as Ian says, we published a proposal in February. We've listened to what people have said and we've thought about it ourselves. We think that this creates some very interesting, different, David's explained why different, but interesting, exciting job opportunities for people. And I think this gives people the chance to be part of a single, strong, supportive national team that speaks with one voice to our partners. And I hope people will look at them on that basis and understand that some of the changes we've been made have been for that reason. And I'd just like to add that in that sense, we've talked about this as we've gone along with our trade union partners, and they've been very helpful, and we'll continue to talk to them about it.